good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to a very exciting DxO webinar. I'm your host, Photo Joseph, and I get to take you through the new Nik Collection 4, which I am personally very excited about. Nik has been a part of my digital imaging life for, well, let's just say longer than I'd care to admit, because then that would be admitting that I'm old. But I have been using this software for a very, very long time. It is fantastic, and it is really exciting to see this evolving over the years. And now, of course, the DxO has their hands on it. It has just progressively gotten better and better, and this is a nice little upgrade that we've seen here today. So, and let's just talk about the agenda for today. This is a top level overview. We're going to be covering kind of everything from a pretty high level. We're not going to go super deep into any one thing because we do just have an hour here, but we are going to cover as much as we possibly can. This presentation today is assuming that you have not yet learned much of anything about the Nik Collection. If you see things in today's demo that you're like, oh, I've already seen that, I already watched your video, apologies for a little bit of repetition here, but I will be using different images, so hopefully it will all be new and exciting for you. But we do want to make sure that anybody who's watching this, regardless whether they've watched every training video out there or none at all, get to understand everything that is new about this. So no assumptions today. So the Nik Collection, here's basically what we're going to be covering today. I'll just read through these bullet points. We're going to talk about how you save, and this is not the order that the demo is, but we'll talk about how you can save presets with control points and even name your control points, which is absolutely huge. Adjusting the color tolerance of control points. We're going to see how you can now adjust control points in a whole new way, which is really, really exciting. Something called meta presets that applies multiple different filters at once. Very cool to play with. The ability to recall the last change made, the last effect made in a filter if you forgot to save it as a preset. Let's see here. Oh yeah, new features like clear view and some new film simulations inside of the black and white tool, Silver Effects Pro. We'll see some new presets, and of course we're going to also see some new layout, new interface rather, of two of the redesigned tools. So let me start by stepping back a little bit and giving you kind of a little bit of a history, if you will, and just talk at a high level about what's going on here. So the Nik Collection, of course, has been around for a very long time. And in 2012, I believe is the year, if I got that right, the Nik Collection was acquired from a company called Nik Software that originally developed it. It was acquired by Google. Then Google didn't do anything with it for quite a number of years. DxO acquired it from Google in, I think, 2017, and then started working on it. Now, the thing is that even at the point of 2017 and then beyond, when DxO was working on it, they were working on the original code that in some cases was over 20 years old. And so it is time to start over. It is time to rewrite these filters from scratch. And that is the process that has now begun with Nik 4. Not every filter has gotten the full treatment, but Silver Effects Pro and Viveza have both been completely rewritten from the ground up. All new code, giving you all the same features, obviously adding a bunch to it, modernizing everything, modernizing the UI, and changing quite a few things about it. And so we're going to focus today primarily on those two tools because those are the ones that look the newest and have all the new capabilities. However, that said, the other tools, while they have not been updated to the new interface and to the new code base, they do still have some new functionality, especially when it comes to the ability to do the meta presets and the ability to copy and paste your settings inside of Lightroom Classic. So there's a lot that is new among all of them, but we're going to primarily focus on Silver Effects and Viveza because that's where the biggest meat of the new stuff is. Let's see here. I think with that said, I think that's a good enough starting point. I think, yeah, let's just jump into this. All right, let me get set up here. We're going to jump over to, that is not the right photo. We're actually going to eventually come to this photo, but not yet. I want to start today in Photoshop. And within Photoshop, I'm going to open, let me get my notes up here. I'm going to open up my first photo to work with, which is that the right? There we go, that's the right one. Here we go, this guy right here, this fall leaves photo. So this is a raw picture. This is a little bit older one from my collection. This was shot in a Canon EOS 5D back 10-ish plus years ago. And this photo, as you can see, is quite colorful, at least it could be once we're done with it. There's lots of greens and yellows and reds in here, and I want to take this into Viveza to have a little bit of fun with it. Now, when I first open it, it is a raw file. We're in Photoshop, so it is opening into Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to do my base processing here and open this up. And actually, at this point, I want to pause and talk a little bit more about what I will be doing throughout this demo. I'm going to be showing you how to use these tools from a variety of situations. Not every one of these situations is going to apply to every user. Once, of course, we get into Nik, then it's all the same for everybody. But as far as how we get into the Nik collection, I want to show you a variety of different ways. So we're going to use Photoshop with raw files as smart objects and not as smart objects. We're going to use Lightroom Classic. And I'm also going to show you how using Lightroom Cc, which does not have a plugin architecture, so you can't actually use a plugin, I'm going to show you how you'd use it as a Lightroom Cc user. And when we get to that part of it, that Lightroom Cc, even though that's what I'm going to use, this same idea will apply to basically any other app that you're using that does not have a plugin architecture. There's a lot of different apps out there that people use. Some have plugin architecture, some don't. The Nik collection might work and some of them might not. It is designed to work within the Adobe space and their plugin architecture. But like I said, some other apps support it, some don't. I don't have a definitive list of what does and doesn't work, but I'm going to show you how, if it doesn't work the way you would like it to in your app, that how you can work around that and still take full advantage of these tools, right? So with that said, we're starting with a raw photo, open an ACR. I'm just going to hit the auto button, do a little auto balancing on there. And I'm just going to click on open this time. I'm not going to open it as a smart object. We'll do that later. I'm just going to open this. And by opening this and not doing it as a smart object, what this means is that the image that we're seeing here has now been rendered out as pixels. This is a permanent image, if you will, permanent pixels. Anything that I do to these pixels will be destructive. Now you'll see when we jump into the plugins that even though it is destructive, the plugin will duplicate the layer, so I can always go back. I can even brush between them. But the basic understanding here is that we are working on a pixel-based file at this point, so anything I do will effectively be permanent. All right, so that said, I've got this picture selected here. I'm going to jump into Viveza. And by the way, I always like to point this out. So this is something called the Nik Selective Tool. It's just a little floating palette that has all the tools on it. You can make this smaller if you like having these buttons up here and you want to make it a little smaller on there. But quite often what happens is people close this and then have no idea how to get back to it. So the way you do that is you go to the File menu, and then you go to the Automate menu, and from there you choose Nik Selective Tool 2 in this case, and that will reopen that window for you. So there's that. Just quick tour of this little box here as well. This box itself isn't new. This was introduced with the previous version. But if you want to get into some of the presets on these, if you click on the little triangle here, it'll show you filters and recipes that you have marked as favorites. And I actually haven't marked any as favorites right now, so we're not seeing them. But if I had any as favorites, you would see those listed under there. And that goes for any of these that has the disclosure triangle on there. So that's how that works. Otherwise, you just click the button to open it. So I'm going to take this one into Viveza. And like I said, Viveza is the first of the completely redesigned tools. So I want to give you a tour of this. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera right now, and I'll try to remember to turn it back on as we jump into the Q&A as well. Okay, so here we are in Viveza. This is the new look, the new UI. First of all, on the left-hand side, you'll see presets, which actually presets themselves are new to Viveza. That's not something we had before. So our presets are on the left. Across the top, you have a compare and your zoom button. So let me just apply a preset here real quick. And then if I do the compare, if I click and hold on this top button, it does a before and after, but I can also do a split view, which is quite nice. So I can do a split view there, and I can even rotate that to show me the split however I'd like in there. Plus you have a side-by-side view, so you can see your before and afters side by side, which can certainly be really handy just depending on what you're doing. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it into the traditional viewing mode. Then you have your zoom buttons. It's set to fit right now. If I go to fill, it will, well, in this case, it doesn't get much bigger, but if it was a vertical picture, it would kind of fill the edges with that. Then of course you have your one-to-one zoom to get really close in here. You can pan around by holding down your space bar and panning around, or using the navigator up here. And then you've got your various zoom ratios here. So kind of a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, or 1-to-2, whatever you'd like in there. And when you choose one of those, that button becomes the default for that. So as I can easily toggle back and forth between that. I'm of course working on a pretty low resolution screen, relatively speaking. It's only 1920 by 1080 for the purposes of this broadcast, but normally on your screen, you'd see things would look a little bit differently just because they'd be smaller UI elements on your big screen. Anyway, so we'll put that back into fit. And then on the right-hand side, you have all of your controls. So starting at the top, you've got a little loop here, which you can toggle to get out of the way if you don't want to. This allows you to see up nice and close whatever you want to look at. Plus, it allows you to pin any portion of this. If you want to always stay focused on one portion of that, you can pin that in. Then underneath that, you have your histogram, which of course gives you the full histogram view of the image, which you can collapse that as well if you don't want it. So let's just free up some space here. I'll close up the loop. I'll go ahead and leave the histogram open, and I'm going to turn on just for a moment here my hot and cold areas, which will highlight. You can see highlighting in blue on there, or if I brought this up, highlighting in red and green, and eventually clipping, showing me the overexposed or the underexposed areas by showing them in that solid blue or solid red or other solid colors in there. And if you want to hide that, you just click on those guys to turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and leave that off for now. So then we get into the adjustments. You see here we have first our global adjustments. So really important thing to remember about Viveza is that Viveza is both a global adjustment tool and a local adjustment tool, meaning that I can do effects that affect the entire image, or I can localize those effects to one very specific small part of the image. So totally up to you. You have control of both. And right now we're looking at the global adjustments. You see it says global right there. Once again, I can collapse that out of the way if I want to. But from here, any adjustments that I make do affect the entire image. You'll see in here a lot of different controls. You've got, your traditional ones you would expect to find, your brightness, contrast, saturation, and so on. You can adjust the red, green, and blue channels individually, even do full hue rotation in here. And then you have selective tones, highlight, midtone, shadows, and black points. And for those who may have used Viveza in the past, that is actually new. We did not have selective tone adjustments before, so now that's there. So that's another new feature in here. Underneath that is white balance. Once again, another new feature for Viveza. This is, because we're not working with a raw file, this is not a true white balance in the sense of raw files are retranslating the white balance. Think of this more like a white balance shift, a color shifting tool. This is going to show us how to shift the white balance, or this is going to allow us to shift the white balance warmer or cooler in there. So that's what that is doing there. And then at the very bottom of that, we get to the selective adjustments. I guess there's actually another one under here, the selective curves in here if you want to, but we're not even going to play with that. We're just going to go ahead and hide that in there. We're going to work with the selective adjustments primarily. And this is our control points, or also known as U points, which I actually only recently learned. The name U points is the letter U called U points. It comes from the original source. This is pointing, like you point at something and it selects that area. That's actually kind of clever. Anyway, so that's what the control points, aka U points, are. I'm going to end up calling them both because I'm so used to calling them U points, but that is what they are. Okay, so that's your UI tour. At the bottom, you can see there's the apply button in there. And I'm going to go ahead and reset this. Let's go back to neutral on here, restart the image over, and let's have some fun with it. So let's see here. So this image, I'll actually add a little bit of contrast to start. Let's just get a little bit of global contrast in there, kind of richen it up a little bit. And now let's jump right into color adjustments. So I'm going to go to my control points, grab a control point, and I want to enhance the green of these trees right here. Here's how this works. I click on one area, and anything that I change now, well, now that I've dropped it, first of all, we see all these adjustments that have come up for the area that I've dropped. I'm going to take the saturation and bring it way up. And you can see that it's brought up the saturation of that area. Let's actually zoom in closer. Let's go like a 1 to 2 zoom. Should do it. There we go. You can see that the green there has gotten quite a bit more saturated. As I toggle before and after, or if I want to see just what that control point has done, let's toggle that on and off. So you can see that it has increased the saturation of the green, but we can also see the kind of yellowish in the stone and in the foliage here, that is also being having the saturation increased as well. So what if I only want to saturate the green? That's what I want to focus on, is just the green. Well, this is the power of the control points, the ability to isolate what area you want to adjust. But right now, if I just drag this around and I try to figure out, well, am I adjusting just the green, or what am I adjusting here? It can be a little confusing as to what you're actually affecting, which is why we have the mask view. Now, when you go to the mask view, now you can see exactly what is being affected. You are seeing the mask that is being built in real time. And now, for the first time, we really see what the U points or the control points are doing. So let me step back once again and explain the idea here of what's happening. When you adjust an image globally, you are, of course, adjusting the entire image. The whole image is getting affected. If you adjust an image, just forget about Viveza for a second. Let's just say you're in Photoshop and you want to brighten a face. One of the ways that you can do that is to make a new layer of the image and brighten that whole layer, right? So the whole image becomes brighter, and then brush a mask over the face. So you are effectively drawing a mask between the bright layer and the dark layer. I guess I should turn my camera on if I'm going to actually look at the screen and wave my hands to illustrate to you what I'm talking about. You would have your background layer that's your original, your top layer that you've made brighter, and then in between those, you're going to brush in a mask, and that mask is going to be over the face so that you don't see the brighter part anywhere except the face. This is just one way of doing things in Photoshop or any image editing tool. At that point, you are creating a mask, and if you were to look at just the mask, the area that you want to see the top layer, see that brighter version of the image, would be white. Anywhere that you don't want to see the brighter image, the top layer, would be black. And any shade of gray in between that is going to show some level of that photo. The darker the gray, the closer to black, let's say, the less of the top image you'll see. The closer to white, the more of the top image you'll see, all the way up to where white is 100%, black is 0%, and then of course every shade of gray in between. So that's a mask, right? And that is a mask at its simplest form in Photoshop. But now here in Viveza, what we're doing with these control points is we're building a mask in real time based off of the chrominance and the luminance of where you've dropped that control point. So the easy example of this is if I drop a control point on something that is dark green, then the area that is part of that mask, with that mask that gets built, will be based off of parts of the image that are similarly dark, so similar luminance level, and similarly green, the similar chrominance level. So luminance and chrominance, color values and brightness values is effectively what we're talking about here. So when you look at this image here, and I go in and I'm dragging this control point around, we see the mask that gets built in real time based off of the chrominance and the luminance of where I've dropped it. So if I just hide that mask view for a second, you can see that it is on these green leaves on here. If I turn that back on, you can see that the green leaves are being primarily selected. They're the brightest white, and anything that's farther away, the farther away it gets from that brightness value and that chrominance value becomes darker values in here and is less affected. So to start, if I want to affect just the green leaves, I need to get my control point into a position that is selecting the green leaves, right? This is not the right position. That is selecting something in the background, and we could toggle this back off to see what it is. It's kind of selecting the shadow area there. So that is not going to primarily select my leaves. But if I move this over like so, and get it in just the right spot, now it is primarily affecting my leaves. Great. But you can see from the mask, it is not just the leaves. It is also affecting or picking up a whole bunch of other stuff around here. So this is where the new color selectivity sliders come in, where I can restrict or expand the mask that is being built based off of the luminance and the chrominance by saying, give me less or more luminance and less or more chrominance. So here's what I'll do. I'll take the luminance and I'm going to increase the limiting. Think of it like that. You're kind of increasing the limit of this. And as I bring that up, we're seeing less and less of the image being selected. So more of it going to black, less of it going to white, and the stuff that is white is getting brighter white, so it's more selected. And then the chrominance as well. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's really a case of every image you have to adjust the sliders to find what works for that particular image. And if I just want to affect those green leaves in there, then somewhere around here is going to select just those green leaves. And now I can also expand the mask in here. So I want to select a broader area of that green or a narrower area of that green. And I'm going to select it right about so. Maybe I'll go a little bit broader on there. I don't want to be quite so isolated. I'll back this off just a little bit, get a little bit more of the green in there. But now I have a mask that is primarily those green leaves. So now when I get out of the mask view, as I adjust my saturation, my brightness, whatever on that, you can see that it is primarily affecting those leaves. And here's a great thing to show. Like if I bring up the brightness here, it's obviously overdone, but you can see how restrictive this is. In fact, let's just bring it way up there. You can see just how restrictive it is. So this is another great example of why you want to toggle back and forth between your mask view and your regular view. So let's just say, and this is clearly overdone, but let's just say for the sake of the demo that I did actually want to make the green this bright. At this point, it looks fake because, forgetting about the fact that it's so bright, but it looks fake because this part of the green is super bright and this isn't. Like it's too much of a disparity, it's too much of a difference. So now with the mask view turned off, if I back the luminance and the chrominance down, the range of what is selected will expand and I'll get more of that image into the selection area. So that again allows you to adjust the mask either while you're looking at the mask or while you're looking at the final image, and it's a balance. You need to do both. So let me just get this the way I want it, which is to take up the saturation quite a bit, take up the brightness just a little bit. And again, I will go ahead and adjust this with the mask view hidden. And that's looking pretty good. So let me just toggle that off and you can see the difference in there. It's a very nice, subtle difference over those greens, making those really pop. All right, that's cool. So now I want to name this. I've just done this control point. I'm going to name this control point green leaves because we now have the ability to rename them. So we see that's just double click on there and off you go. And that's that. Okay, cool. Now let me do another part of the image. Let's go up to the red leaves up here. Now these red leaves are quite unique among the whole picture. If I zoom back out, there's not a whole lot that's red, but I really want to make that red stand out. So kind of like I did here to the green, let's do that. Let's zoom back in and I will jump over to the control points again. Let's grab a new control point, drop that into place. My kind of go-to, I'm going to hide the global adjustment so I don't have to scroll as much. There we go. My default is always to go straight into the mask view. I want to make sure that I've dropped it onto a good selection point. It looked like I had a good point on there. Again, I can change the size of that, restrict what is being selected in there, but I don't want to restrict it too much. Maybe a little bit of chrominance, maybe not a whole lot of luminance in there, and that will do a good job of that. So let's find right about there. Cool. Hide that mask. And now once again, I'm going to take my saturation up a little bit and actually add a little bit into the red channel on there. Just pump a little bit more red into that. And maybe darken it a little bit. It's kind of like weirdly a little bit too bright. So I'm going to darken that just a hair there. Now let's zoom out and see what that looks like as I toggle that on and off. There we go. Very nice. Adding a nice little bit of bright red popping into there. I'm going to go ahead and rename that one to red leaves as well. Great. All right, let's do one more adjustment. I want to do one over the waterfall area here. However, this adjustment, I don't want it to be localized to just the rock, just the water, or just the green or something. I want something that affects this whole area here. So how would I do that? Let me drop a control point down here onto the rock and make this a bit bigger. And let's go into the mask view again. And here you can see that it's, well, like, okay, there it's selecting just the water. There it's primarily the rock, this other part of the rock and so on. But that's not what I want. I want this whole area to be affected. Well, let's go back to my adjustment sliders or my color selectivity sliders. And remember, if I drag these up, I can restrict this and get very narrow, right? If I just wanted to affect the water, I mean, look at that, perfect, right? Just the water. But here's what else I can do. I can back this off and go negative, go the other direction, and get to a point where there's no more mask. This is another new feature, and this is kind of funny. This seems like it's not that big of a deal, but this is actually a really, really big deal. We have never had in the Nik collection the ability to add an effect with a control point that wasn't in a mask. We never had the ability to do a simple radial gradient in the Nik collection, and now we do, which personally I actually really am excited about because sometimes you don't want it to be isolated. You just want something that affects that whole area. So that's what I've got here. So I've backed this off now, and now with that is just a plain old normal radial gradient mask. Now I want to do, let's see here, maybe I want to bring up the brightness in there just a little bit. What I really want to do is bring up the structure. I want to really crank the structure up of that part of the image in there to just really enhance the rocks, the water, just everything that's in that center view. So as I toggle that on and off, we can see the difference in there. And it is subtle. I recognize that. And of course, looking at this through the GoToWebinar interface, it might not be super dramatic and obvious, but it is a subtle yet beautiful change. And I think that's an important point to make as well, that when you're doing this kind of work, quite often it's not about being big and dramatic, it is subtle. And those subtle things are what makes the difference. So that's all done there. I'm going to rename this one as well. I'm going to call this Waterfall. And just so I don't forget, I'm going to call this a radial grad so that I know that that is affecting the whole thing and it's not a U point building a mask. Okay, so now I've got 3 of these control points made. I've got a green leaves, a red leaves, and a waterfall. I have another photo similar to this, and I want to apply the same look to this. I'm happy with this, but I want to apply this to another photo. So I'm going to save this as a preset. I click on Save Preset. We'll call this Fall Leaves and Fall Leaves 2. And I'm going to choose to save this with the control points. This is enormous. We now have the ability to save our control points here in the Nik collection. Now, I know some of you watching this have been using this for a long time. Go, hold on a second. We always had that capability. You just had to know the super secret handshake to do it, which was Command Option click or Control. I always forget. I always forgot what it was because like it's just it's a secret. Now it's not a secret. Now it is revealed in the UI. You simply click on Save with control points, and now those control points will get saved with the preset. So let's go ahead and enable that. So that's on. Fall leaves 2. I'm going to hit Save. Now I'm going to apply this. It's going to render that back into Photoshop. And as I promised you, while it is destructive on this layer of pixels here, if I hide this, we'll see the original image behind it. So there's my original version. So if I wanted to at this point, I could actually enable a mask view in here, bring up a brush tool and do like, do some kind of a big brush on there. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Do some kind of a big brush effect on there, but that's not what I want. I don't need to do that. I just wanted to apply that effect. So there we go. All right, so that effect is applied there. Now, like I said, I have a second photo. So let me open another photo, a second fall leaves photo here. Let's open this one up. And I'm going to go through the same process in here. I'll hit the auto adjust in RAW. This is actually a little bit on the dark side, I feel, so I'm going to brighten this up just a little bit, and that's fine. And then I'll click on open. And that is now open. There we go. I'll click on Viveza. That's going to launch the Viveza. And then from there, I'm going to apply the preset that I just saved, which has my control points in it as well. So down here under custom, we can see my presets, fall leaves 2, the one I just did. I click to apply that and it applies, but here's the thing. Hold on, my green leaves aren't exactly right. My red leaves aren't right. Well, of course not, because the control point is not necessarily where you intended it. Look here, there's my red control point. They're up here in the yellow leaves, and the green one, it is on the green leaves, but is it really in the right spot? Well, that's the beauty of this, is I can, of course, move these wherever I need. And to ensure that I'm moving the right one, I can look at my list here. There's my green leaves control point, my red leaves one, and my waterfall one. So I can go to my red leaves one. And right now it's, it's easy and obvious which one is which, but imagine if you had dozens of these, having these labels in there, super, super handy. Let's go ahead and zoom in close to that red leaf one and get that into the right position. Not 2 to 1, that's too far. Let's do 1 to 2 zoom on there. Hello, there we go. 1 to 2 zoom, and let's pan up here to the top of the plant. Nope, yes, nope, yep, there we go. And I'll turn on the mask view for that. And I can see there, like, my position wasn't exactly right, so I can grab that control point and kind of move it into place. Let's just say right about there. That looks pretty good. And let's hide that. And then let's go down to the green leaves section. Let's go up to this portion of the leaves scene there. There we go. Enable the green leaves mask. And you can see there, it's not quite the right position. So I'm going to, once again, reposition this and get it into the right spot. And let's get that into just the right position here. But let's just get that. That's close enough right there. And then remember, I'm not locked into the chrominance luminance settings I had set before. So if I want to expand this out a little bit, I can go ahead and do that. That was just a starting point, that preset. So that's looking pretty good there. Let's go ahead and jump out of the mask and see how that's affecting the image. Coming back, there we go. We can see that bright green that's happening on the image there. Now let's go ahead and zoom out, and I will reposition the waterfall one if that's needed. So let's see, where's the waterfall one? There it is right there. I can just reposition that. Remember, that one's a radial gradient, so I'll make that one a little bit bigger right there. And there is my new final result. So now, this might be a good chance to do a side-by-side view, where I'll go into the side-by-side split view, and let's rotate that because we got 2 vertical images on here. And there we go. And you can see the nice before and after there, looking lovely. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and apply this, and that is now going to render that into that image as well. So there's the second way to go about, the first way to go about applying a look to your images. If you're using Photoshop, open them as not as a smart object, just open as a regular photo, and off you go. And this would apply if you're opening a RAW through ACR and then just clicking open, or you're opening a TIFF file, or you're opening a JPEG file. It's all the same idea here. So next we're going to look at working with smart objects. Before we do that, I see a couple questions coming up, so we're going to jump over to those. First question, will you show access from Photolab 4? Actually, no, that's not part of my agenda today. I'm going to have to build that into another demo in the future, but I am not planning to go from Photolab 4 today. Mark, what is structure? Great question. Structure is localized contrast, which probably doesn't help anymore. The idea behind structure, before we talk about how it works or what it actually does, the idea behind structure is that it adds detail into the fine texture points of an image. So if you have a brick wall, is a really good example of this. A brick wall has a whole lot of texture on it. If you look closely at a brick wall, it's got all these little bumps and grooves and shadow and highlight areas on it, really, really textured. The structure slider will enhance that texture. It brings it out to be a little bit more prominent. In this video, in this sample here, I was putting texture on the rock and on the water. So all that texture in the rock becomes more prominent. The texture in the water becomes more prominent. Okay, so it's basically taking texture and making it more contrasty, more prominent. It's the right. I keep coming back to the word, but that's the right word. So how is it doing it? It is doing localized contrast, which means instead of normal contrast takes the black point and the white point of the whole image and it stretches it out. So everything that's dark gets darker, everything that's bright gets brighter. That's contrast. Localized contrast, which is what structure is it's looking specifically around the edges of something. So imagine, let's keep this really, really simple. You've got hair, blonde hair against a blonde hair, just like I have, against a dark background, a black background. Make it super simple. So you've got this really bright light colored hair against a dark background. If you were to zoom in super close to the image and look along the edges of the hair, that is going to be a very high contrast shift from the bright blonde hair to the, and we're zoomed in like 1000% here, bright blonde hair to dark background. That line right there, that edge right there, is where the contrast is expanded when you do structure. It is enhancing making the darks darker and the brights brighter right along that edge. So it makes that object stand out more from the background without actually making the object brighter and the background darker, which is what regular contrast would do. Now amplify this to something that is as textured as this rock face here. And every little nuanced little bit of texture on there, a little bit of darker green moss and the brighter white rock and so on, everywhere where there's a contrast between the bright and the dark becomes more prominent because it only enhances the contrast around the edge of it. And that's happening at very much at a subpixel level. It is very, very fine detail enhancing. So the whole image doesn't become brighter and darker, higher contrast, just the edges around the details do. And you end up with all that texture being more prominent. So that is what structure is doing. Hopefully that answers that question. Robert, what is chrominance? Chrominance is color. Chroma or chrominance is color. So luminance is brightness, chrominance is color. That's that. Okay, let's move on. So now, hide my camera again. Now I'm going to do a smart object. So let me just close these two photos here and open this photo here. All right, we'll open this photo of this chap. All right. And I've already done a little bit of color adjustment on this image the way that I want it. We have this fun street portrait photo. And this photo I'm going to open as an object, not as pixels, but as an object. So what does that mean to open it as a smart object? You notice there's a new little icon that shows up down here in the corner. As a smart object, I can at any time double click on that image and go back into ACR. And so let's say I want to make this black and white, just using ACR. Forget about any of the Nik Collection for a second. And I click OK, and it's going to do that, renders out as black and white. And then I make some changes to this. Let's just like add levels to this, and I change the levels on this image. Let's do it like that. Okay, cool. And then I go, yeah, I really didn't want this in black and white. Well, I can double click on this, go back into ACR, get out of the black and white mode, and then now have that back to color. And there's my levels applied to it. Let's get rid of those levels because that was hideous. So now what I've done is I have totally non-destructively edited the image, going all the way back to the base pixels, all the way back, not even base pixels, back to the base raw data. And even though I've made adjustments to it, I can go back and change things at any time. That is what a smart object does. Since this is a smart object, any Nik filter that I apply gets applied as a smart filter, which means I can go back in and re-edit that filter at any time. I can even go back in and re-edit the raw image at any time. So let's take advantage of the new meta presets to do this. So here's the meta presets. Meta presets are combination of multiple presets applied at once with a single click. And you can see which preset's going to be applied, which filter rather is going to be applied by looking at the little icons here. So like for example, this one is going to apply an HDR effects along with a Silver Effects Pro. This one is Viveza and Color Effects Pro, and so on. And if you want to know what these are going to do, there's a little question mark next to it, and it gives you a basic description of what it is going to look like. So that's fun. All right, so we can go ahead and and start applying these and just seeing what we get. So I don't know, I'm going to try one. Let's try purple haze. Let's see what this looks like. So I click on this. Notice now that the interface of the Nik Collection will not launch. We're seeing the processing dialog. Over on the right-hand side here on the layer stack, we're going to see the results. So there it's been added as a smart filter. We see Color Efex Pro and Viveza have both been added. If you look in the bottom left corner, you'll see the progress bar saving out, and it eventually renders out and finishes. And there is our final effect. So this is a final effect of two different filters being applied at once. But because they're smart objects, I can go in and I can change these at any time. So this has applied Color Efex Pro 4 and Viveza. Let's see what Viveza has done to this. So I double click on Viveza on here. It's going to open up and we're going to see only the Viveza effect. So this is what was done within Viveza. We'll just put that in and you can see that it has done this kind of purpley effect on there compared to the original. And I can change this now. I can go, ooh, I like that, but a little bit too cool. Let's kind of warm this up a little bit. So we're going to take it this way. We're going to warm this whole image up just a little bit. Probably helps if we turn on the white balance. Let's actually enable that. Bravo. Open up. There we go. Okay, so there I've got that little bit of a color temperature shift that I've added into there. And I go, okay, that's cool. I like that better than what I started with. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Now it's going to render this back into Photoshop, rendering from the original raw file. So we're going to see everything re-render, reprocess again. So this is a slow process because you are working where every change you make has to get reprocessed from the base level all the way up, but it is the most flexible way to work. So like, let's say now that haze is a little bit stronger than I would like. So let's go ahead and go into Color Efex Pro 4 because apparently that's where the haze is coming from. And from here, we'll look for where that haze is coming from and make some changes to it. So here we're in Color Efex Pro. You can see now that this is the original interface. So we're not seeing the new UI in here. This filter has not been rewritten yet, but it is obviously still working within the Nik Collection and more importantly, working within the meta filters. So this has a graduated fog opacity on here. It's actually the only thing that's been applied. So let's just take the opacity of that down a little bit. It's just a little bit too strong in there. In fact, let's take a control point and drop one on his hat and just kind of take the opacity of that down a little bit on his hat so it's not quite so strong. Perfect. Dig that. Hit OK. And once again, it's going to re-render back on top of that whole thing. Now, of course, if I want to try another meta preset, I can do that. Let's take this image here. I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate that. Let's make a little bit more room here. There we go. So now I have two copies of this. We're going to delete all the smart filters on that top layer. So now we're back to the original for this one. And now with that selected, let's try a different effect. Let's do expired film. Let's see what that looks like. So I'll hit the expired film one, and we will see what that looks like. So by the way, folks, I want to let you know as well that we have an absolutely enormous audience today, and there are a ton of questions coming in. There's just no way I'm going to be able to get to all of them. I do apologize for that. I will say if you have questions that don't get answered today, we're going to do more webinars. You can always hit me up on Twitter. I can't promise you that I'll get to your question, but I will try. PhotoJoseph on Twitter. You can also try dropping questions on my YouTube videos where I've done YouTube videos about the Nik Collection. That's another good place to ask them. There's just so many people here. There's no way we're going to get to all of them. Sorry, but I will do my best. Okay, so here's a new look, right? Here's another look. This was, what was it, expired film? Another look applied to that same photo. And now I have two versions of that photo in the same stack. And again, at any point, I could go all the way back into the raw level of this and adjust that image at the raw level if I wanted to. Like maybe I want to do a little highlight recovery because the highlights on his hat were getting blown out a little bit. So I'll pull the highlights down a little bit. There we go. We got some detail back in his hat. Hit OK, and it's going to render back in. Cool. Okay. Whoa, we are running out of time already. This is unbelievable. There's so much to do. Okay, we're going to go into Lightroom Classic next. In Lightroom Classic, I'm going to show you an incredible feature where we can copy and paste adjustments from one photo to another. You think, well, Lightroom does that. Of course, Lightroom has the ability to copy and paste adjustments. What's the big deal there? Well, it has the ability to copy and paste its own adjustments, but not filters. So if you are a Lightroom user, you know that the ability to copy and paste adjustments is awesome, right? You're, say, a wedding photographer, travel photographer, whatever. You want to have a consistent look across all of your photos. Copy and paste adjustments is huge. Then you'll probably also know that as soon as you add a third-party filter onto the image, the whole thing falls apart. You no longer have that capability. Now let's go over to Lightroom Classic. So here we are, Lightroom Classic. All right. So as I was saying, if you use a third-party filter, suddenly the whole thing breaks because you can't copy and paste the filter look, except that now we can. So I've got 3 photos here, obviously wedding type photos, wedding photo, and I want to apply a couple of filters. And I've already done some basic adjustments in here in Lightroom, which I've synced across. So I've got my Lightroom basic adjustments in place. But now I want to do something with these in one of the Nik filters. So I'm going to start by taking this into Viveza 3. So this is going to be our first edit point. Now you notice here you get your standard dialog you would always get when you open a raw image into a Nik Collection filter or any filter in Lightroom. You have to convert it. It can't send a raw file over. So you're going to edit a copy of this. It's going to render out what? It's going to render out, in this case, a TIFF file. So go ahead and let that render. It is now going to render out that image as a TIFF and then open that TIFF inside of Viveza, which is conveniently opened on the wrong screen. Let's see, there we go. All right, let's get out of the split view here. Now in this case, just you do your thing, you adjust the image the way you want to, but I'm just going to apply a preset on here real quick, which if I look at my notes, I'm going to figure out which preset I was going to do. Yes. Let's do fill light. Okay, we're going to do this fill light adjustment on here, preset on there. Let that apply. There we go. So that's applied. That is kind of brighten it up a little bit. Cool. All right. So there's my adjustment. I'm not worried about making this image look amazing. I just want to apply a filter. So I've applied this Viveza 3 look to it. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and apply this. So again, in a real world, you've done a lot of work to this. You've come up with your own custom look on that. That's cool. So there's that TIFF image. But now I want to apply a second filter to this. This time I'm going to jump into Analog Effects Pro. And I'm going to edit the original. Now, remember, I'm currently looking at the TIFF file. You can see down here it says TIFF. I don't want to duplicate this to edit another copy. I just want to edit the original. So I'm back into that one TIFF. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with multiple TIFFs in here, which I don't want. So we're going to open this into Analog Effects Pro. And I'm going to grab let's see here. Let's go for Classic Camera 7. Let's see, I'm going to add this Classic Camera 7 look to it. Okay, so this is my Classic Camera 7. I'm going to turn off the dirt and scratches because I don't want that on there. And, maybe I make some other adjustments to this, but maybe just take this kind of fade that out a little bit. Let's actually add a bit of a more different look to it, a little bit of bluish on there. And cool. So there's my look. There's the final look that I want. So I save this. So I have now applied 2 different Nik Collection filters to this photo. And once Lightroom finishes thinking, it will show us the end result of those 2. Let's go back and forth here. Sometimes switching to the library module helps. There we go. And now we can see the final result of that. So there's the original and there is the affected one. I want to now apply this same look to these 2 photos here. So here's what I do. I go to the one that I've just worked on, right click on that, choose export, copy and apply parameters. From here, I want to copy Viveza in Analog Effects Pro. So I copy Viveza and it tells me it's copied it from there. And then I copy Analog Effects Pro and it's copied it from there. In fact, I had previously done one with the color effects, which is still on the clipboard. We can see that here, but we're just going to do those 2, Analog and Viveza. Click OK. Those 2 effects are now copied onto the clipboard. I'm now going to select both of these images here, both of the other images, go back into that same new menu, export, copy, and apply parameters. And now I'm going to apply the adjustments. Remember, I have 3 of these on the clipboard right now, but I'm not going to use color effects. I'm going to use Viveza and Analog Effects. I'm going to click apply on Viveza first because I want to apply them in the same order that I did before. These are going to require editing a copy, of course, because it's a raw image to start with. So I hit run and notice I have 2 images selected. So this is going to simultaneously to both photos, render them out as TIFFs and apply that Viveza look to it. Then I will select those 2 TIFF files and jump into Analog Effects and do the same thing. So while that is rendering out, I'm going to jump over to the questions because we are so running short on time on here. And let's see here. This question is, when you open a file in Photoshop and apply adjustments from Viveza or Color Effects Pro, after you're done, you have the option to save as. If you rename the file, doesn't the original raw file remain unchanged unless you ask it to apply change to the original file? Okay, so remember, a raw file is impossible to edit. When you're looking at your .cr2 or .rw2 or .nef or whatever, that raw file cannot be edited. So no matter what you do, you're never overwriting that. You would have to save as a PSD or a TIFF file or whatever. This is more about the layer itself in Photoshop. So once you've gone through ACR and you're in Photoshop with that pixel-based layer, because you hit open, not open a smart object, that pixel-based layer, if you were to affect anything on those pixel-based layer, and then save your file, close it, whatever, you can no longer undo. There's no going back. There's no getting back to that. So that's the destructive aspect of it. So once you're in Photoshop, if you did a save as, then of course you would still have the original previous version, but you still have your original raw always regardless. So I hope that answers that question. I hope that's what you were asking. Okay, so now that has been applied. I'm going to click OK so I can look at the two new images. So there's the two versions, see, with the Viveza look to it. Now I'll select both of those that I applied the Viveza look to, right click, go to Export, Copy and Apply Parameters. And now I'm going to apply the Analog Effects Pro. And at this time, once again, just as before, I'm going to apply it to the original, so I'm not getting multiple copies. Click Run, and now it's going to apply to those two. While that's rendering, another question. What percentage does this smart object layer increase a file size? Is it a method you use regularly? Second part of the question, yeah. If I'm going to go to Photoshop to do something, I am almost guaranteed going to be doing stuff with smart objects, just because I want that flexibility at all times. I may, in the interest of saving file size later, go ahead and flatten some of those, but I'm always in smart objects if I'm in Photoshop. I don't care that it takes longer. I don't care that it makes for a bigger file size. As far as how much bigger it makes, I don't know. I don't have a metric for that, sorry. But you can find, if you have Photoshop, you can find that out yourself. Just open a file, open a raw file as pixels, save as a PSD, open that same raw file, open as a smart object, and save, and you can compare the differences there. Sorry, I don't have a solid answer for you. Okay, so both of these are done. I click OK, and now I can see there is the combined result. So there's that look, and that one all applied. There we go, all applied to all of those photos at once. So super, super, super awesome capability. Now, let's see here. I've got 10 minutes left, and I want to show you two more. Let me look at my notes. Two more things that I want to show you. Yeah, okay. I need to show you here. There's one thing I need to show you that I'm just going to go very quickly into. So let's just start the whole process over. I've got this photo here. I want to edit this, let's say, in Silver Effects Pro. Is that how I want to do this? Sure, we're going to do it this way because I want to make sure that I show you something that I don't forget to show it to you in my next demo step. So I want to show you something very quickly in here. I'm going to open this image in Silver Effects Pro, and let's say that I'm just going to use a preset here just to start. Let's do this high structure smooth. That's actually probably not going to be good. High structure on skin's not generally good. High key 1. There we go. Let's choose this one. Okay, that's cool. It's a little bit too high key, so I dialed down the brightness. Let's take that down a little bit, and I go, great, that's the look that I want. Okay, cool. So I want to apply this same look to another image. I click apply. Now, we saw that I had the copy and paste. We just saw that. But I go to another photo where I want to have the same starting point, which means I should call that up as a preset, but I didn't save it as a preset, right? So here's what happens. If I go back in here and I edit in Silver Effects Pro again, and I didn't save that previous adjustment as a preset, that means there's no easy way for me to get back to where I was. I could call up the preset that I started with and try to remember, adjusted the brightness, what else did I do in there? However, there's a new feature in here, which is to recall the previous edit. So here I am in Lightroom. Here I am in Silver Effects Pro. I don't remember what the last thing I did was or how I got there, but if I go to the edit menu, I have this new apply last edit, and it will apply everything that was done to the previous image onto here. So there we go. So that's how we do that. So that is a super, super awesome feature in there. And then I can apply that and it'll render in. Okay. Final step is to show you this out of Lightroom Cc, which again would apply to any other app that doesn't have a plugin architecture. Don't ask me why Lightroom Cc doesn't have plugins yet. Totally beyond me, but it doesn't. Okay, let me just quit Lightroom Classic here and let's jump over to Lightroom Cc. All right. Maybe quitting was a bad idea. Here we go. Okay, let me delete this image that I was working with earlier because delete that photo, delete. All right, here's the photo that I want to work with. This is the original raw file. Let's just double check that. Hopefully I didn't just delete the wrong one. Yes, this is my raw file, an RW2 file. This is the raw. I have already done adjustments here in Lightroom Cc to this. I now want to take this into a Nik Collection filter. I have two choices. I could choose to edit this from here, from this finished point in a Nik Collection, or I can choose to start over from the base level. We can actually make that decision later. Right now, I've got a raw file that I've adjusted in Lightroom, and if I right-click on it to edit this, there is no edit in or send to the plugin option. So here's what I have to do. And again, this will go to any app in the world that doesn't support the plugins. I go export one photo, and I'm going to choose to export original plus settings. Now from Lightroom, what this means is it's going to stick this on the desktop. This means it's going to export the raw file along with an XMP file that has all the instructions for what I just did here in Lightroom. If I then open this up in Photoshop, I would be able to recall all those XMP settings and then edit away. So here's what I'm going to do. So this is one of a couple of workflows. So I've just exported this as a raw file. Let's go ahead and launch Photoshop again. Launch Photoshop. And I'm going to open that raw file in Photoshop. Open desktop raw file. You see the XMP file sitting next to it. I open this file into the Photoshop, and there's all the adjustments. So you see it looks identical to the way it did in Lightroom. But I want to start over. So I'm just going to reset everything. Let's go here and reset to default. So now we're back to the base raw file. Looks like I straightened this out before, so I'm actually going to do a quick little straightening here. Let's just do this, draw a line across there, straighten that, good. And now I'm going to open this as a smart object, which again, for me, for my personal work, I just prefer to work this way. So now I've got a smart object. Now let's just apply a quick preset. Let's go, or apply one of the filters. I'm going to go into Silver Efex Pro for this. And when I'm in Silver Efex Pro, I'm going to show you some of the new things in here that are super exciting. So in Silver Efex Pro, this is the new SCP. We've only been in here briefly before. Let me show you a couple new things in here. One of the cool, well, first of all, it's completely rewritten. This is part of the Viveza collection of the Viveza rewrite, this as well. My control points, I have the same capabilities in here that I had with the other within Viveza. I can adjust the luminance and the chrominance of my selection in there. So I've got that control. So there we go. I just isolated her hat in there. And let's say I want to kind of brighten that up a little bit. Oops, let's go down to my adjustments here and we'll brighten up her hat just a little bit. So it's just her hat that's getting brighter. Cool, so I've got that capability in there. That's awesome. But I have two other new adjustments in here that I want to highlight. The first is a simple one, clear view. Clear view, and this isn't really the right image to show clear view, but clear view is the ability to cut through fog and haze in an image. And you can see here, it's really kind of cutting through whatever little bit of mist there might have been in that room, very quickly cutting through that. This can be super dramatic on the right type of photo. This isn't the best photo for it. But for those of you who've used Clearview on the in Photolab before, you know how good it is. This is Clearview from Photolab, so that's awesome. But what's really awesome in here is the new film grain. So anybody who's used DxO Film Pack will recognize this. This is all the custom designed film grains from DxO Film Pack. Look at all these beautiful film stocks that we have to choose from in here. These are faithfully recreated film stocks from film scans, from high resolution film scans of these actual films that have then been in the computer lab completely recreated digitally, so that the grain patterns that you get from these really truly do mimic what you get from real film. This is a huge, huge upgrade to Silver Efex Pro. So I've just added the film grain of T-Max 3200. Let's look at this at 1:1, and we can see the subtle film grain that's been added on here, which is this beautiful, beautiful grain pattern. If I want to increase the grain size to make it a little bit bigger, because I want to make it really crunchy, I can do that. The intensity of that grain I can bring up as well. And I mean, if you look at this, let me bring this really, really contrasting, just to make sure it comes through on through GoToWebinar. You can see that this has just a beautiful structure to it, really intense and very realistic looking film grain. So that looks fantastic. Okay, so let's zoom out of there. I've done this. Let's say this is the end result of what I want. I like it. Hit apply. I'm applying this back into Photoshop. Now remember, this is a smart object in Photoshop, smart layer with a smart filter. I'm now going to save this. So I hit Command S. I hit Command F. Stop. Let's just go to the File menu and choose Save. And it's going to say, hey, it has to be a save as because it's a Photoshop. It was started as a raw file. So I'm going to just put this on the desktop. So that same file name, PSD. Okay, cool. So I saved that. Alrighty. So now I have a PSD file. Now remember, we started from Lightroom. All right, let me close this. I'm going to hide Photoshop. Let's go back over to Lightroom. Now here's kind of the, it's an extra step, but this is how it works. I'm going to, let's just do a drag and drop. Where's that PSD? There it is. There's that PSD file. Let's get this window out of the way. There's my PSD file. You can see it's black and white. I'm going to drag this into, let's get into the grid view, drag this into Lightroom. So now importing this into Lightroom into the same album that I had before. And I will now have this image. Now, for those of you who might be thinking, why didn't you just go to edit in Photoshop and then open the plugins? The reason is because Lightroom CC does not give me an edit in Photoshop as a smart object. If I edit it in Photoshop, it would have rendered out the image, which as you saw, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to keep that smart object capability. So now I have that. Now I have a PSD file in Lightroom that has the smart object embedded in it. And if I go in here and I right click and choose, now I choose edit in Photoshop, it is going to open up that Photoshop file where we now have our full smart object editability. So it's kind of a workaround for not having the smart object editability from within Lightroom CC. Just export the original RAW, open it in Photoshop, leave it as a smart, set it as a smart object, import it back into Lightroom CC, and now I can open it from Lightroom CC and have the full RAW, full smart object capability in there. So that's one workflow. The other workflow, and this is the kind of really non-Lightroom, absolutely any app in the world that you want, is, let's see which photo am I, oh yeah, this photo here. Here's a RAW photo, right, Dart RW2. I'm gonna open this just to kind of really prove the point. I'm gonna open this in preview, right? Just a simple preview app in the Mac. And now I'm going to export this as a TIFF file. So let's see, it's set to TIFF, there it is. Make sure, yep, it's in the right place, and good. Okay, so that saves it off as a TIFF file. So give that a second to process. There we have the TIFF. Let's make sure that is it. Yes, that is the TIFF file. Now I want to open this in, let's say, Color Efex Pro. Well, each one of these plugins is also an app. It is an app. So I can take this TIFF file, drag and drop this into Color Efex Pro 4, and it is going to launch into Color Efex Pro 4 where I can do anything that I would normally do, and then save it back into that TIFF file. And let's just go ahead and apply a preset on here. Remember, I have this save and edit later option. If I enable that and I click save, then that TIFF file that can live anywhere, live in the Finder, live in Windows Explorer, live in another app, now has that layered capability built into it. So if I go back into the plugin, I can re-edit that at any time. So that is your most base workflow from, it doesn't matter where you are, what app you've got, take your original, convert it to a TIFF file, and open that into any of the Nik Collection filters. So that is what I wanted to show you today. There's so much more to go into on this, but we are out of time, and that is where we're at today. So I hope that was awesome. I will be back in a couple of weeks, or maybe it's next week even, I'm not sure. Look at the calendar. All right, folks, that's it. I'm out of here. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope this was fun. I know it was fast. I know it was a lot, but that's how we roll here. All right, we'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.